Hey, my curious friend. You've just landed on my channel and I couldn't be happier. If it's your first visit, make sure to subscribe and spread this video around. Consider it your good deed of the day. Now, I want to know where you're watching from. A quiet village, a bustling capital, or maybe somewhere totally unexpected? Drop it in the comments. I love reading them all. All right, let's get rolling. The first thing you should know about my wife, Sarah, is that she's always been the sharp one between us. Second, she assumed I wasn't clever enough to notice what she was really doing behind the scenes. Third, and most important, she got that part very, very wrong. My name's Dave Sullivan. I'm 43, and I own Sullivan Construction. Until about 3 weeks ago, I was convinced I had a good marriage. Sure, Sarah often worked overtime at St. Mary's Hospital, where she'd climbed the ladder to become an assistant administrator. And yeah, we hadn't had much intimacy for months. But after being together for 15 years, I figured that was just what happens. Life settles, routines kick in, and you build on mutual trust. Except trust, I've since realized, is like drywall over a rotted beam. Everything looks solid until one good jolt sends the whole thing crashing down. That jolt hit one Tuesday evening after I got home from the job site, dusty and tired, just hoping to catch the game with a cold beer. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and found Sarah mid-phone call, still wearing that ridiculous nun outfit from last Halloween. Now, I'm not the paranoid type. I fix things for a living. I deal in facts, not fantasy. But the sound of her laughter made my stomach knot. "Sister Mary Catherine has been naughty," she said into the phone, her voice dropping into a sultry whisper I hadn't heard directed at me in ages. She needs to confess her sins, privately. I stood there in the doorway, unnoticed in my work clothes, and watched the woman I'd spent a decade and a half with twirl around in costume like she was auditioning for something out of a late-night cable show. "The conference runs through Friday," she added with a giggle. "Plenty of time for personal consultations." Another conference, of course. For nearly a year now, Sarah had been going on these so-called business trips. Oddly, she never brought home any workshop materials. She didn't mention presentations or panels either, and she always returned glowing, as if she'd been on a spa vacation, not sitting in a hotel ballroom discussing policy changes. That's when my eyes landed on something by her purse, a jumbo pack of Trojan condoms. We hadn't used those in over a decade, not since she switched to birth control. And yet, there they were, as obvious as a fire alarm in a quiet room. She finally noticed me and jumped slightly. "Oh, hey, Dave." "You're back early," she said, clearly flustered, quickly trying to slip the box into her bag. "I was just confirming my flight for the conference." "In costume?" I asked flatly. She let out that fake, tinny laugh she always used when she was bluffing. "Oh, this? It's for a theme party at work next weekend. Medical mayhem. You know how we go all out for those." I nodded like I believed her. "Sounds like a blast. Enjoy the trip." She headed upstairs to pack, and I quietly made a decision. I pulled out my old work site pocket knife, been carrying it since my 20s, and methodically pricked a tiny hole in every single condom wrapper. Not big enough to tear, just a barely visible puncture. "Let's see just how virtuous Sister Catherine is," I muttered, sealing the box shut like nothing had happened. The next morning, Sarah kissed me goodbye like always, playing the part of the devoted wife. "I'll be back Sunday night," she chirped, hauling her overpacked suitcase toward her car. "Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." I stood at the window with my coffee, watching her drive away like she was heading to a beach resort, not a work seminar. As soon as her car rounded the corner, I poured another cup and started making plans. See, construction's not just about building. It's about understanding structure, how things are assembled, how they hold up, and just as importantly, how they can be taken apart. My marriage, I realized, was just a well-painted lie, and it was time to start demolition. First order of business, gather evidence. Sarah liked to think she was some covert operator, carefully covering her tracks. But 15 years together makes people lazy. She forgot that I was the one who set up the Wi-Fi, handled all our tech, and understood the digital guts of our household better than anyone. I started with her work laptop, the one she always claimed was strictly business. Her password? A joke. Her maiden name plus our wedding date. No creativity at all. Her email was spotless. No shock there. She wouldn't use her main account for anything risky. Then I remembered something from a few months back, a cheap shampoo bottle in her gym bag. Strange, since she only used expensive salon products. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now it seemed worth a second look. I went to her bathroom and found the same travel-size bottle tucked behind some skin creams. When I picked it up, it felt heavier than it should. I unscrewed the base, and sure enough, a small flip phone slid into my palm. Jackpot. A burner. Disposable, anonymous, impossible to trace. Smart choice, really. Too bad she didn't hide it well enough. There weren't any bills showing up at our address, no trace of online activity to connect the dots. Sarah had planned every detail of this, like she was running a black ops mission. When I powered on the burner phone I'd discovered hidden away, I began scrolling through the message history. What I read made my stomach twist and my jaw clench. The contact was saved under the name Dr. Feel Good. Real original. Judging by the timeline, they'd been sneaking around for almost 8 months. The texts were filthy, so explicit that even a seasoned man would flinch, and left no room for misinterpretation about what she was really doing during those alleged hospital retreats. One particular message stood out. He'd written, "Can't wait to see you in that nurse outfit again." Sarah's reply, "Sister Mary Catherine needs more practice with bedside care. Don't forget the handcuffs from your sales kit." That last part was the tell. Sarah worked in a medical facility, and the only people who came in with kits were pharmaceutical reps. I kept digging, hoping to find something that would unmask the guy. Then I hit pay dirt. A newer message from Sarah read, "Tommy says the new heart meds just landed." And there it was. A name, Tommy, and a profession, pharma sales. I could already picture him. One of those smooth-talking charmer types with expensive suits, overbearing cologne, and a flashy European car that wasn't even paid off. I'd seen their kind at hospital events, shiny, shallow, and all about the image. But I needed more than a stereotype. I kept sifting through that phone for hours, devouring every message. What I uncovered wasn't just infidelity. It was an emotional affair with deep roots. They weren't just hooking up. They were in love, or at least pretending to be. They had pet names, shared inside jokes, and even fantasized about a shared future that didn't include me. The one message that made my blood boil was dated 2 weeks ago. "Dave's so clueless, he actually thanked me for working late. By Christmas, we'll have enough to disappear. He won't know what hit him. Disappear, with her, with my money." The very account I'd been building for over a decade, working late, taking overtime, skipping vacations, was going to fund their getaway. I sat there in the kitchen, still coated in drywall dust from the day before, holding the phone like it was a weapon. But I didn't feel heartbroken anymore. That stage was behind me. What filled me now was far colder, heavier, a kind of righteous fury forged from betrayal. This wasn't rage, it was resolve. The same hands that built homes could just as easily dismantle them. She thought I was some blue-collar fool too busy to notice. That mistake would cost her dearly. I opened my laptop and got to work. If Tommy was a rep doing the rounds at St. Mary's, there had to be a trail. Visitor logs, staff schedules, appointment sheets. I made a few discreet calls to people I trusted. After a few hours of digging and asking pointed questions, I had a name. Tommy Patterson, 38 years old, representative for MedCorp Industries, married to a woman named Linda with 2 young kids, living comfortably in Meadowbrook, an upscale suburb about 10 miles away. Bingo. Using Sarah's secret phone, I sent Tommy a message. "Congrats, Tommy. Looks like you're going to be a dad." His response was instant. "What are you talking about?" We've been careful. I shot back. Sometimes careful isn't enough. Maybe we should meet and talk this out. His panic practically jumped off the screen. This can't happen. If Linda finds out, I'm finished. I replied, then you better figure out your next steps, quick. I let that message marinate. That was just my opening move. I had something far more elaborate in mind. The rest of the weekend was spent methodically gathering my arsenal. I printed every message, sorted them chronologically, and tucked them neatly into a labeled folder. Then I did a little recon. Tommy's house was everything I imagined. Massive, with a manicured lawn, circular driveway, and a shiny luxury vehicle parked out front like a status symbol. His life looked pristine from the outside. I watched them Saturday morning, observing their routine. His wife, Linda, looked like the typical suburban mom, late 30s, well-kept, probably not working, ferrying the kids around in a beige minivan. Their children were little, still in elementary school. They weren't part of this mess, but I knew they'd feel the fallout. That part stung. I didn't want to hurt them, but their parents, they had it coming. Some damage was unavoidable. Sunday night, Sarah came home from yet another conference with a light step and a glowing smile. She kissed my cheek like nothing was amiss and asked about my weekend. Pretty quiet, I said, voice steady. Did some work around the house. And your conference? I asked with mild curiosity. She replied smoothly, oh, the usual. Presentations on hospital procedure and improving staff workflow. She didn't miss a beat. I had to give her that. But I did learn a few tricks to boost morale on the floor, she added with a sly grin. I raised an eyebrow. I'm sure you did. Her expression tightened slightly. She didn't like that, but I kept my face unreadable. Not yet. This wasn't the moment. The next morning, she left for work like it was any other Monday. It wasn't. After sitting in my truck for an hour, I finally drove over to St. Mary's Hospital, a place I was more than familiar with. Over the years, I'd handled a lot of their maintenance contracts, rewiring, upgrading camera systems, fixing whatever went down. The staff knew me not just as a contractor, but as Sarah's husband, the guy who always showed up, tools in hand, no complaints. That's where I spotted Tommy, loading up pharmaceutical sample cases into a spotless BMW that looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom. Exactly the type I expected. Tall, tanned like he lived under a tanning bed, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. His smile gleamed unnaturally bright, likely the result of some dentist's masterpiece rather than good genes. I walked toward him with purpose. Tommy Patterson? I said. He paused, looked puzzled, trying to figure out if he should recognize me. Yeah, that's me. Do we know each other? Dave Sullivan, I replied. Thought we might need to have a quick word. His face lost all color the moment the name hit him. He knew. I'm not sure what this is about, he said, already trying to squirm away. Oh, I think you are. I handed him a stack of printed messages, the most explicit ones he'd exchanged with my wife. You've got quite the imagination. That bit with the handcuffs, real inspired. He darted his eyes around, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere a little more discreet. No need. Just wanted to say, I think your wife Linda would appreciate your literary talents. I turned without waiting for a reply and walked back toward my truck. All the best, Tommy. He stood frozen, gripping the papers in a shaking hand, the other still clenched around his car keys. The first domino had been tipped. Now it was time to watch the chain reaction unfold. That evening, I picked up the phone and dialed the Patterson house. Linda answered on the third ring. Mrs. Patterson? I asked politely, keeping my voice even and professional. This is Dave Sullivan with Sullivan Construction. I came across a few personal effects I believe belong to your husband. He must have left them behind at one of our job sites. Personal effects? She asked, clearly puzzled. Clothing, among other things. Not something I'd want to describe over the phone, I said, carefully letting the implication settle. If you catch my meaning? Her tone tightened. What kind of clothing? Costumes, women's outfits specifically, the kind nurses wear. That sort of thing. I paused again. I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I figured you'd want to know. There was a long silence on the other end. Where exactly did you find these? I gave her the name of a dingy motel just outside the city limits, the kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. Room 237. According to the manager, your husband checked in under his own name. I see. Thank you for telling me, Mr. Sullivan, she said, her voice cold and measured. Then she hung up. I leaned back in my chair, cracked open a beer, and took a long sip. The storm was coming. By Tuesday morning, the fallout had begun. Tommy suddenly called in sick, which was odd, considering I'd just seen him looking smug and healthy the day before. Back home, Sarah was acting distant. She barely touched her dinner, her eyes glued to her phone like she was waiting for bad news to hit. Rough day at work? I asked, feigning casual interest. Just some problems with staff scheduling, she muttered, still avoiding eye contact. But Wednesday brought the fireworks. Her phone rang during dinner. She jumped up and grabbed it before the second ring, then hurried into the hallway. Even so, I could hear the yelling from where I sat. No, Linda, it's not what it looks like, Sarah was insisting, clearly rattled. You've misunderstood everything. Apparently, Linda had followed the trail and found Sarah through the hospital's staff directory. The call didn't last long, but when Sarah returned, her face was ghost pale and her hands were shaking. Emergency at work, she lied, her voice barely steady. On Thursday, the final piece fell into place. I was out back in my workshop, honing my chisels, when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Linda Patterson standing there. She was smaller in person than I'd expected, but there was a fire behind her eyes that made her presence undeniable. Mr. Sullivan, I'm Linda Patterson. We need to talk. I invited her in, offered her a folding chair, and waited. My husband's having an affair with your wife, she said, no hesitation. I found receipts, photos, messages, things I wish I could unsee. I know, I said simply. I discovered it a few days ago myself. How long's it been going on? Based on what I found, about 8 months. She clenched her jaw, the anger barely held in check. He thinks I'm an idiot. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he guards his phone like it's top-secret intel. What do you want to do? I asked her. Her eyes locked onto mine. I want to blow their fantasy life to pieces. Now that was something I could work with, Linda went on. He's been skimming money from our joint account. Small amounts, hoping I wouldn't notice. I did. Sarah's been up to the same tricks, I said, pulling out a few printed bank statements. Look at these. She's been draining our savings while I've been out earning it. We sat together for the next hour, reconstructing the timeline, matching receipts, texts, withdrawal records, mapping the affair in cold, methodical detail. Linda was sharp, ruthless, the kind of sharp you only get after being deceived by someone you trusted. We didn't need revenge. We wanted clarity, exposure. We weren't out to break them up. We were going to make sure the world saw them for exactly who they were. Step 1. Ruin the illusion. Let shame do the rest. Because she had administrative privileges over their shared family account, Linda was able to access Tommy's work devices without any trouble. That Friday morning, while he was away at the office, she went through his message history with Sarah and forwarded the entire thread to his supervisor at MedCorp. Alongside it, she attached a note expressing concern that her husband was engaging in personal activities on company time using corporate resources. By noon, Tommy was out of a job. But that was just step 1. My move came next. I printed the most damning messages Sarah had sent and mailed them, anonymously of course, to her direct superior at the hospital. I included a short letter accusing her of using hospital systems for non-work-related communication during work hours. But that was only a warm-up. The real punch came later that night. Sarah had once again claimed she was staying late at work, an excuse that no longer fooled me. I followed her from the hospital parking lot straight to the Sleepy Inn motel, the same place I'd mentioned to Linda. As I suspected, she pulled in right beside Tommy's sleek BMW, and together they vanished into room 237 without hesitation. I waited for an hour, parked just far enough away not to be noticed. Then I made my move. The motel room door was flimsy, barely stronger than cardboard, but I didn't plan to break it down. I'd brought along a cordless drill, a length of heavy-duty chain, and a solid padlock from my workshop. In under 2 minutes, I'd drilled anchor holes into the door frame, wrapped the chain through, and locked it tight from the outside. The only way out now was a bathroom window too small for either of them to squeeze through. With the trap set, I started making phone calls. First up, Linda. "They're holed up in room 237 at the Sleepy Inn," I told her. "Bring your camera." Next, I rang the motel's front desk, reporting disturbing noises and a possible domestic dispute coming from that same room, just enough to raise concern. Then I called Sarah's sister, Beth, who'd never been much of a fan of mine. "Beth, it's Dave. You need to come to the Sleepy Inn off Route 9. Sarah's in room 237. You're going to want to see this firsthand." Lastly, I contacted Tommy's brother, Mike. Linda had given me his number. "Hi, Mike. This is Dave Sullivan. I'm a friend of Linda's. Tommy's gotten himself into something. He's at the Sleepy Inn, room 237. He's going to need you." As I ended the last call, I could already hear the chaos unfolding inside the room. Sarah and Tommy were shouting and tugging at the door, confused and panicking as they realized they were locked in. The chain held firm. Moments later, Linda pulled into the lot in her minivan, arriving just as the elderly motel manager walked up with a master key in hand. Linda stepped out with a camera slung over her shoulder, her expression steely and focused. "That them?" she asked me. I gestured toward the door, where muffled yelling still leaked out. "All yours," I said. The manager glanced from the chained door to the two of us, eyebrows raised. "Mind telling me what's going on here?" "Just a personal emergency," Linda replied sweetly. "My husband's in there, with his girlfriend. I need a few photos for my divorce attorney." His eyes narrowed. "I could call the cops, you know." "You could," I replied calmly. "Or you could avoid flashing lights and squad cars in your parking lot on a Friday night by letting her handle this quietly." He considered his options, then muttered, "5 minutes. Then I want everyone gone." Earlier, I'd given Linda a spare key to the padlock. She unlocked it quickly, yanked open the door, and stormed inside. What we walked in on was exactly what I had hoped for. Sarah was frantically trying to put her nurse outfit back on, while Tommy scrambled to pull up his pants. The shock on their faces, guilt-ridden and ghost-white, was perfect. "Say cheese, sweetheart," Linda said, snapping photo after photo. "These are going to look incredible in divorce court." Tommy tried to speak. "Linda, just listen." She cut him off. 15 years, Tommy. 15 years and 2 kids, and this is what you do? A sleazy motel and a hospital executive? Sarah tried to interject. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," Linda snapped. "You're both frauds who finally got caught. Keep smiling. These pictures are priceless." Soon after, Beth arrived and immediately began screaming at Sarah, accusing her of disgracing the family and abandoning their values. Moments later, Mike pulled up, clearly flustered. He tried to calm things down while simultaneously helping his brother dress and get out of the room. I stood at a distance, quietly watching it all unravel. There was a cool, heavy satisfaction in my chest. This wasn't just exposure, it was total, humiliating destruction, right out in the open. But I wasn't done yet. Early the next morning, I drove over to the MedCorp headquarters. Tommy's company car, a BMW, was still parked in the lot. He hadn't returned it yet. One of the rear windows was cracked just enough for me to take advantage. From my truck, I retrieved a can of expanding foam insulation, the industrial-grade kind that multiplies to 50 times its volume and hardens like rock, usually used to seal construction gaps. And then I got to work. I slid a length of spray foam tubing through a narrow opening in Tommy's car window, and didn't stop until the inside of the vehicle was completely filled. The seats, the dashboard, even the gear shift vanished beneath layers of expanding insulation. When I stepped back, the BMW looked less like a luxury car and more like a science fair disaster that had grown out of control. Saturday brought another carefully orchestrated moment. Sarah returned home after yet another so-called emergency hospital meeting, which I strongly suspected was just another round of hush-hush meetings with her higher-ups trying to contain the fallout, and walked into a scene I had curated just for her. Her possessions were all arrayed across the front yard. Her wardrobe, favorite novels, toiletries, and beauty products, every item she'd ever introduced into our shared space, now sat neatly boxed and waiting on the grass. I even made sure to include the ridiculous nun costume, still sealed in its dry-cleaning plastic. She marched up the porch stairs toward me as I sat calmly with a cold beer in hand. "Dave, what the hell is this supposed to be?" she demanded, furious. "Just a bit of spring cleaning," I replied evenly. "Figured I'd lend a hand since you're clearly getting ready to shack up with Tommy." Her voice grew sharper. "You don't have the right to do this. I live here too." "Actually, that's where you're wrong," I said. "I bought this place before we ever got married. Title's in my name only, which legally makes you a guest. And now I'm asking that guest to leave." Her face contorted through a carousel of emotions, shock, rage, and then the dawning sting of reality. "You're being irrational." "We can work this out," she pleaded. "Oh, really?" I said flatly. "You want to patch things up after using our joint account to finance motel romps with Tommy? After lying to my face for nearly a year while planning your grand escape with our savings?" She made a move to argue again, until I held up a set of printed screenshots, harvested from the burner phone I'd uncovered. "Every message, Sarah. Every sick little exchange. Every detail of your double life is right here. If you want to battle this in court, I'm more than prepared. But I promise, you won't like the outcome." That shut her down. The color drained from her face. Her eyes darted from the packed boxes on the lawn to the front door she no longer had any claim to. I didn't budge, just kept sipping my beer as if this were any ordinary Saturday. She spoke again, but softer this time. "Where am I supposed to go?" I didn't blink. Not really my problem anymore. Maybe there's still space in Tommy's foam-filled ride. She said nothing. Just quietly began dragging boxes to her Honda, making several trips while the neighbors stared from behind curtains or pretended to garden. Everyone saw, and they all knew. Once she finally drove off, Mrs. Henderson from next door strolled over carrying a casserole dish under tin foil. "Dave, honey," she said gently, "I made too much tuna casserole. Thought maybe you could use some company tonight." We'd been neighbors for over 10 years, and never once had she brought over food. The gossip mill had clearly been working overtime, and in this version of events, I was the wronged husband. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mrs. Henderson," I said with a nod. She gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. "That woman never treated you right. Always acted like she was too fancy for the rest of us." Sunday arrived with the final act. Early that morning, Linda gave me a call. "Tommy's been blowing up Sarah's phone." Total panic mode. He's desperate to talk. What's our next move? I told her I had one last surprise in store for the lovebirds. We staged the final scene at their go-to spot, the Sleepy Inn Motel. Linda convinced Tommy to meet her there to supposedly settle their divorce paperwork. Meanwhile, I told Sarah that Tommy wanted to regroup and plan their getaway. Both of them showed up just minutes apart, each looking worse for wear. Tommy had borrowed his brother's car since his own BMW was still sitting in front of MedCorp like a frozen sculpture. Sarah looked like she'd spent the night curled up in the back seat of her Honda. I had pre-booked room 237, their usual, and made sure the door locked from the outside. But this time, the audience wasn't their spouses or lawyers. It was someone else entirely. First to arrive was Janet Murphy, Sarah's boss and chief administrator at St. Mary's Hospital. I had reached out the previous night with a vague warning that she might want to witness something disturbing involving one of her senior staff. Next came Robert Hayes, an executive from MedCorp's compliance division. He had already received an anonymous envelope from me a few days earlier, complete with damning texts and documentation detailing how Tommy had been abusing company equipment. And last, the grand finale, Channel 7 News. I'd submitted a confidential tip about possible insurance fraud involving a hospital executive and a pharmaceutical sales rep. The words public money and kickbacks were like catnip to a hungry newsroom. By the time I unlocked the motel room, the cameras were already rolling and reporters had their notebooks out. Tommy and Sarah stumbled out into the sunlight like prisoners blinking into the daylight, only to be hit by a wall of microphones and questions. "Mr. Patterson," one journalist said as he shoved a mic toward Tommy's stunned face, "are you currently under investigation for using your position as a pharma rep in an illegal incentive scheme with hospital officials?" Tommy looked like he was about to pass out. "No comment," he muttered, barely audible. "Miss Sullivan," another reporter shouted, "how do you respond to claims that you traded contract access for personal favors?" Sarah shoved past the cameras, her voice trembling. "This is harassment. I'm contacting my attorney." But the damage was already done. That night's news cycle ran the story under the headline, "Hospital Administrator and Pharmaceutical Salesman Exposed in Explosive Scandal." There was just enough fact to carry the piece, and just enough drama to ensure it went national. By Monday morning, Sarah's employment at St. Mary's was officially terminated. Tommy was now blacklisted from the pharmaceutical industry. Whatever fantasy future he and Sarah once daydreamed about had vanished. Both of their careers lay in ruins. I was in my workshop, carefully sharpening a set of chisels, when Sarah appeared for what I knew would be the last time. Her face looked tired, worn down by the chaos of the last several days. "I hope you're happy with yourself," she said, her voice brittle. I glanced up from my tools and answered evenly, "More or less." "You've destroyed everything I've worked for, my job, my reputation, my entire career," she said. "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "I just pulled back the curtain so everyone else could see what was already there." That's when the tears came. Not the manipulative kind she used to summon whenever she wanted her way. These were genuine, raw, exhausted. "We could have tried to fix it," she said, wiping her face. "Therapy, a clean slate, something." "And what exactly would we have used to rebuild, Sarah?" I asked, my tone sharper now. "The cash you siphoned away behind my back? The trust you shattered? Or the respect you threw away for a fling with a drug rep?" "You don't understand. It wasn't what you think." "It was exactly what I think," I said. "You chose Tommy. You picked lies over honesty. You chased your impulses instead of honoring your vows. All I did was make sure you had to live with that decision." She rubbed at her eyes, leaving smudged makeup streaked across her cheeks. "So what now?" "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "You do what everyone does after they wreck something they can't fix. Figure out how to survive it." She paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame. "You used to be a good man, Dave." "I still am," I said simply. "I just quit letting people take me for a fool." When she left, silence returned to the shop, broken only by the hum of my equipment. I looked around at the space I knew best: wood, steel, dust, and discipline. The house was in my name. The company was thriving. I had more jobs lined up than I could handle before the snow set in. And around town, something had changed. People saw me differently. There was a quiet respect, the kind you earn when the truth finally comes out. Sarah and Tommy got what they thought they wanted, each other. But now they were broke, disgraced, and tied to one another in ways they hadn't anticipated. Last I heard, they were living in a small one-room rental on the far edge of town, both stuck working retail just to cover the basics. Linda had finalized her divorce and walked away with most of what Tommy had left, plus a generous alimony check. Their kids seemed lighter somehow, no longer weighed down by the secrecy and tension their father brought home. As for me, I hadn't gone anywhere. I was still right here, among the sawdust and the smell of pine, working with my hands, building things that were meant to last. The only real change was internal. I now understood what real foundation meant, and I'd never again trade that for comfort, illusion, or misplaced loyalty. I picked up my phone, wiped every image, deleted every document. Sarah's burner got tossed into the trash without ceremony. The fight was done. I'd won. Cleanly. Without apology. Some people might say I went too far. That I was vindictive. Excessive. Maybe so. But those same people have never had their life detonated by someone they trusted with everything. They've never uncovered betrayal wrapped in a white coat and perfume, tucked away in a cheap motel room. I gave 15 years to that marriage. Emotion, sweat, money, time. I lifted Sarah up, put her needs above mine, helped her reach goals she never would have touched on her own. And behind my back, she plotted to cut me out of everything we built. So yes, I went full scorched earth. But I did it legally, with restraint. No violence, no law-breaking. Just a focused, measured execution of justice, like any skilled craftsman would approach a difficult job. Sarah underestimated me. Thought I was too dense to catch on, too naive to notice. She was wrong. About me, about everything. Sometimes the one with dirt under his nails and a high school diploma beats the polished professionals who think they're untouchable. Now, the house was quiet in the best way. Peaceful, not empty. I cracked a beer, turned on the ball game, and leaned back in my chair. Tomorrow I'd be at the Henderson place, framing out a new edition. Sturdy work that would last decades. Tonight, I had something better than peace. I had closure. A cold drink in my hand, and the deep satisfaction of knowing the man who played fair, this time, walked away with everything that mattered, because he knew the right tools, and he knew how to finish the job.